My name is Zara Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, a retired school librarian who once spent her days labeling shelves and mending worn pages. I thought I knew something about order, about the quiet dignity of things finding their place. But that morning, as I stood at the entrance of the Marina Ballroom where my daughter's wedding was about to begin, I realized some stories are rearranged by other hands, without your consent. The air smelled of salt and perfume. White roses floated in crystal vases. Chandeliers shimmered above silk-draped tables, and the ocean glittered behind tall glass walls. I arrived early, clutching the small clutch Harold had given me years ago, the one with a frayed lining but a steady clasp. A young woman in a headset smiled briskly. "Name, please?" she asked, holding a tray of shiny name tags. "Zara Whitmore," I said, adjusting my shawl. Her smile faltered. She scanned the tray, then the list beside it. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This must be yours." She pressed a sticker into my palm. Thin, glossy, printed in gold. One word gleamed back at me. No one. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. I almost laughed. But the woman had already turned to greet another guest, and I stood there, invisible under chandeliers that caught every light except mine. Behind me, laughter swelled. Sylvia Layton, my daughter's future mother-in-law, glided past in a silver gown, bracelets chiming like distant bells. "Ah, you must be the help," she murmured, not breaking stride. Clara trailed beside her, radiant in lace, cheeks flushed with excitement. Or was it embarrassment? She didn't meet my eyes. I pinned the sticker to my chest anyway. Better to wear the insult openly than fumble with it in secret. A photographer waved guests into formation for a group shot. I drifted to the edge, half in the frame, half out. When the flash burst, no one noticed the woman standing near the floral arch, clutching a handbag too old for the room. Champagne corks popped. Applause scattered through the air like confetti. The Laytons gathered at the center table, their laughter rising above the music. A waiter brushed past me with a tray, murmuring, "Excuse me, staff entrance is that way." I smiled politely. My seat, it seemed, was wherever I decided to stand. Sometimes silence weighs more than words. I felt it pressing against my ribs, cold and precise. My daughter's smile belonged to another family now, one that measured worth by last names and ledger lines. And me, labeled no one, I became a footnote at her beginning. Still, I stayed through the vows, through the glittering toast, through the cutting of a cake I hadn't tasted. Because love, even uninvited, lingers. If you've ever stood in a room filled with people you love and felt yourself vanish, stay with me. Don't click away. Sometimes no one has the last word. Later, when the music softened and couples spun under fairy lights, I walked along the dock outside the ballroom. The water lapped against wooden beams, each ripple catching the moon. Beyond the railings, the yacht gleamed, sleek, silent, moored in the dark. Asteria, the name Harold had chosen. He used to say a vessel carries not just people, but promises. I remembered the day he showed it to me, the pride in his eyes, the way his hands traced the polished helm. "One day," he'd whispered, "they'll forget where the anchor lies. But you won't." Back then, I didn't understand. Tonight, I did. Through the glass wall, I watched Clara laughing with Graham, his arm around her waist. Sylvia leaned in, whispering something that made them both smile. Victor nodded, detached, as if sealing another business deal. They looked complete, a portrait painted without me. I pressed my fingers to the sticker on my dress. The edges curled slightly under the humidity, as if even the paper tried to peel away. A small tug on my sleeve broke the spell. It was Maya, the flower girl, her curls haloed by string lights. "Miss," she said shyly, "you dropped this." She held out a folded napkin. Inside was a petal, pressed and perfect. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. She smiled and skipped back toward the ballroom, leaving me with a square of linen and a kindness I hadn't expected. I tucked the napkin into my purse beside a worn photograph. Harold at the marina, Clara perched on his shoulders, her hands gripping his hair, sunlight painting their faces gold. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air. Grief, I'd learned, doesn't fade. It folds into you like a knot pulled tight. The laughter inside grew louder, a distant tide I no longer belonged to. I took one last look at the ballroom, at my daughter twirling beneath chandeliers, and turned toward the parking lot. My heels clicked softly against the planks, steady and deliberate. Outside, the night was vast and quiet. The hum of distant traffic mingled with the rhythm of the sea. I unlocked my car, set my purse on the seat, and stared at the sticker on my chest until the letters blurred. Then, slowly, I peeled it off and placed it on the dashboard, a small monument to the moment I ceased waiting for permission to exist. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Nothing urgent, just a reminder I'd set years ago. Trust review, Marcus Kane. I almost laughed. Some meetings arrive right on time. I started the engine, headlights slicing through the dark. In the rearview mirror, the ballroom lights shimmered like a constellation fading behind me. Ahead, the road curved toward the marina offices, where papers slept in drawers, waiting. By dawn, they would wake. The morning after the wedding, sunlight crept through the blinds of my apartment, landing on the framed photo of Clara in her cap and gown. She had been all laughter then, cheeks round with pride, clutching the diploma I'd ironed her dress shirt for. I stared at that photo as I stirred my coffee, trying to quiet. The echo of last night's orchestra and the shimmer of a sticker still sitting on my dashboard. No one. When the bitterness rose too fast, I opened my window. The air smelled of tide and diesel from the harbor. Below, fishermen were unloading crates of shrimp, voices steady, movements sure. It was a scent I loved, the scent Harold carried home on his collar after sailing. He'd once told me, "People show you who they are by what they notice." I hadn't wanted to believe him when he said that, but now the lesson felt carved into me. My mind slipped back 2 years earlier, to the day Clara first brought Graham and his parents to my home. I had dusted the bookshelves twice, baked lemon bars from Harold's old recipe, and polished the small brass bell he used to ring when he came through the door. The apartment was modest but bright, every corner humming with memories. I wanted them to see warmth, not wealth. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my dress and opened it with a smile. Clara stepped in first, radiant, the kind of glow love lends. Behind her stood Graham, polite, his handshake firm but distracted, already scanning the room as though measuring square footage. Sylvia followed, tall and elegant, pearls resting against a steel gray blouse. Her husband, Victor, nodded curtly before drifting toward the window, studying the view like a man appraising an investment. "What a charming little place," Sylvia said, glancing at the framed photos lining the shelf. "So, cozy." The pause lingered like a hairline crack. I offered tea, motioned toward the sofa, tried to make conversation. Sylvia's eyes moved from the worn rug to the chipped teacup Harold had given me on our 10th anniversary. "You've kept it all very traditional," she said finally. Clara's voice, bright but uneasy, filled the space. She's used to things like this. Mom likes vintage. There was no malice in her tone, just a translation, one meant to smooth over the edges of difference. But something inside me folded quietly. Harold used to say our home smelled like stories. Now it smelled of apology. Graham complimented the lemon bars, though he left most of his untouched. Sylvia asked about the building's age, the parking situation, whether I'd considered something more modern, perhaps closer to their side of town. Each question wore the polish of civility, but left a small bruise. Clara shifted the conversation to their engagement plans, the destination venue, the guest list. She spoke quickly, her eyes darting between me and Sylvia, as though juggling approval. When I mentioned I'd kept the lace from my wedding dress, perhaps something old she could carry, Sylvia smiled tightly. "Oh, we've already spoken with a designer in Milan," she said. "Custom pieces. It's simpler that way." The lace stayed folded in my hands. After they left, the apartment felt smaller. I walked to the window, watching their car pull away. Clara waved, once from the passenger seat, distracted by something on her phone. The sunlight caught her engagement ring, a flare of gold that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. That night, I set the teacups back on the shelf, side by side, one chipped, one whole. Harold's words returned again. People show you who they are by what they notice. Sylvia had noticed everything worth erasing. The months that followed were filled with small omissions. Group photos I wasn't in, conversations I was added to only after they'd ended, wedding updates filtered through polite emails instead of phone calls. Each detail felt deliberate, the way ink fades when too many fingers touch the page. I told myself this was how daughters grow, a way that she was building a new life, one with chandeliers and modern glass walls. Still, each silence pressed harder than the last, reshaping the air between us into something fragile. The final sign came one afternoon when Clara stopped by to collect childhood boxes for the move. She stood by the bookshelf, holding the silver frame Harold had made with her toddler photo inside. "Do you think this fits our new place?" she asked gently. "It held your first steps," I said. She smiled, distant. "Maybe I'll store it for now." When the door closed behind her, the room seemed to exhale. I reached for the lace again, ran my fingers along the delicate thread, and tucked it into a cedar box beside Harold's compass. Some heirlooms wait for hands that remember where they came from. Now, sipping my coffee by the window, I glanced at the horizon. The yacht lay somewhere beyond those docks, gleaming under the same sun that lit their penthouse dreams. They thought it was theirs, a wedding gift promised through whispers and assumption. But Harold had tied each knot himself, documented every line, signed every clause. One day, he'd told me, "They'll forget. You won't." I turned from the window, sunlight warming the framed photograph once more. Maybe this was how forgetting began, not with absence, but with replacement. I traced Clara's smile in the picture and whispered, "I'm still here." I spent most of that Sunday sorting through Harold's old files, their edges soft from years of handling. He'd kept everything in perfect order, each envelope labeled in his steady handwriting, each folder sealed with care. I'd never thought I would need to touch them again. They were his world. Vessel registrations, marina leases, tax receipts, and letters on cream stationery bearing the logo of Whitmore Marine Holdings, a name that once sounded like security. But now, each paper felt like a lifeline. Because for all the ways the Laytons had tried to reduce me to no one, Harold had left behind evidence that I was still someone, someone who mattered in ink, in law, and in legacy. When we were younger, Harold used to come home from the shipyard smelling of cedar and salt. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his ledger, balancing numbers with the same patience he showed when teaching Clara to tie knots. "A promise means nothing if it isn't tied right," he would say, looping the rope with deliberate precision. "You start with the anchor, not the sail." I hadn't known then that he was teaching me something larger, that foundations mattered more than appearances. After his passing, I couldn't bring myself to look at his handwriting for months. Grief had made even the neatest letters blur. But that morning, as I opened the steel box he'd kept under our bed, the scent of paper and brass filled the room. Inside lay the trust documents, a sealed envelope marked Code, Asteria, and the Marina lease, renewed in my name every year since his death. The Asteria, $22 million of gleaming white steel, crafted in Italy, docked at slip B-17. To most, it was a luxury. To Harold, it was a promise. He'd named it after a star, saying it would always guide Clara home. When Clara got engaged, I assumed Harold's foresight would be a blessing. The yacht, after all, was where we'd scattered some of his ashes. It had hosted birthdays, anniversaries, the quiet mornings when Clara would sit on the deck reading while Harold taught her to steer by the horizon. It was his pride, his legacy. But as wedding plans grew, so did assumptions. Graham once mentioned over dinner that the yacht would make a fine honeymoon vessel. Sylvia, sipping her wine, smiled as though confirming it. "It's good she'll have something to bring into the marriage," she said smoothly. "Every family contribution counts." Clara had said nothing. Her silence then felt like a small betrayal, the kind that bruises instead of breaks. I let them believe what they wanted. Some truths ripen in their own time. Now, unfolding the trust, I read Harold's meticulous clauses. He had designated me as the sole trustee, the primary beneficiary, and, most importantly, the holder of full authority over any transfer of ownership. His signature, dated 3 months before his heart gave out, sat beside a notary's seal. A copy of the United States Coast Guard Certificate of Documentation lay underneath, its embossed emblem faintly catching the morning light. I traced the line bearing my name, owner of record, Zara Whitmore. Hull identification number, LX9, Harold's initials hidden in the digits. It was the sort of detail he delighted in, a private wink between us. I closed the folder carefully, pressing the edges flat. This wasn't revenge. It was remembrance. Harold had built this vessel, not just with money, but with meaning. And meaning, once tied, does not come undone by arrogance. Later that afternoon, I took a walk down to the marina. The docks gleamed under a pale sky, gulls circling lazily overhead. I found the Asteria moored where it had always been, lines secured, deck immaculate. Her white hull mirrored the clouds. I ran my fingertips along the railing, remembering Harold's hands guiding mine when he'd said, "You don't pull tight until you're sure." I had been sure for years. Nearby, the dockmaster, a young man in a navy vest, waved. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Still planning to renew the slip lease?" "Yes," I said softly. "We'll keep her right where she is." He smiled. "Glad to hear it. A classic like that deserves the space she was built for." I stood there long after he left, the hum of engines and the clatter of rigging blending with memory. Somewhere across town, Clara and Graham were unpacking wedding gifts, likely believing the yacht would be waiting as their inheritance. Perhaps Sylvia was already drafting announcements, another asset folded into their empire. But Harold's foresight had outlived them all. The trust wasn't a weapon. It was a map, drawn with patience, anchored by care. I pulled out my phone and opened the contact list. Marcus Kane, estate attorney. I hesitated for a moment before tapping the message icon. My fingers hovered, then began to type. Marcus, we need to review the Asteria documentation. Schedule earliest possible meeting. ZW. When I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't triumph. It was gravity. I turned back to the yacht. The water around her rippled gently, sunlight sliding across the deck like a blessing. In the distance, a bell chimed from another slip, echoing the old brass one Harold used to ring when he came home. I kept the anchor, Harold, I whispered. I remember. The wind stirred, cool and clean, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Somewhere within it, I thought I heard his reply, the low, steady rhythm of faith rewarded. And for the first time in years, I smiled without apology. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a slow unraveling. Every tradition I dreamed of sharing with Clara seemed to slip through my hands, each one replaced by something polished, imported, or pre-approved by Sylvia. I tried to tell myself it was just how modern weddings were planned. Busy schedules, big opinions. But the omissions gathered like dust, quiet and undeniable. It started small. An email chain I was never copied on. A meeting that was too last minute for me to attend. Clara always apologized afterward, her voice rushed and distracted. It's just the planner, Mom. You know how she is. But the planner's emails always ended with cheerful emojis and the signature, sent from Sylvia's iPad. One afternoon, Clara called while I was pruning the garden. We're doing a cake tasting tomorrow, she said. It's at noon, but I think it's just easier if we handle it. Sylvia has a friend who owns the bakery. I paused, pruning shears frozen mid-air. Oh, I thought tasting the cake was something we'd do together. There was a silence, thin as glass. I know, Mom. It's just, there'll be a lot of people, and Sylvia already has the deposit. I'll bring you pictures? I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. Of course, honey. Pictures are fine. When we hung up, I clipped a rose stem and set it in a vase. The petals fell before I reached the kitchen. A week later, I dropped off a small package at Clara's building. Inside was a silver frame engraved with the date of her wedding. I'd slipped a photo into it, Harold holding Clara as a toddler, both laughing, sun in their eyes. On the back, I'd taped a short note. So you always know who's cheering for you. That evening, the doorbell rang. A courier stood there with the same package, untouched. A yellow post-it was stuck to the wrapping. We already have enough. Thank you. The handwriting wasn't Clara's. I held the box in both hands, the weight of it strange and heavy. For a long time, I just stood in the doorway, hearing the echo of the courier's steps fade down the hall. Then I carried the frame to my bedroom and set it on the dresser beside Harold's photo. He was smiling in his naval jacket, eyes bright and certain. Guess it's just us again, I whispered. Later, when I slid the post-it from the box, it tore slightly, leaving a small, jagged edge. I smoothed it out and tucked it into my album, between pages of school plays, birthday cards, and a crayon drawing that read, Mommy plus me plus boat. I closed the cover gently. Some wounds need to be preserved, not erased. The next week brought another invitation I never received. A florist consultation Sylvia arranged for immediate family only. Clara called afterward, telling me how beautiful the arrangements were, how the lilies matched the marble floors. I asked what she chose for the mother of the bride corsage. She hesitated. Oh, I think the planner said it wasn't necessary. Everyone's going minimalist this year. Minimalist? Such a clean word for absence. I tried to fill the silence with small acts. I polished Harold's compass. I pressed the lace from my wedding dress into a sachet. I even booked a hair appointment Clara had once recommended, though I canceled it the morning of. Looking at the mirror, I realized I wanted to look like myself, not like a guest in someone else's photograph. When I stopped by the church one afternoon to drop off a donation envelope, I caught a glimpse of Sylvia in the courtyard, directing vendors with brisk authority. She spotted me, her expression unreadable. "Oh, Zara," she said, "how thoughtful of you to come. We've nearly finished the arrangements. I wanted to see if there's anything I could help with." Her smile was thin. "Everything's handled. But thank you." Then she turned to the florist, already issuing another instruction. I stood there for a moment, hands clasped, until the weight of being unnecessary nudged me back toward the car. That night, I opened the album again and slipped in a pressed white lily I'd found on the sidewalk. It wasn't from their arrangements, but it was real, imperfect, and mine. The final straw came when the seating chart arrived. I spotted my name printed small, tucked near the bottom, beside a table marked Vendors and Staff. Clara brushed it off when I asked, "Oh, Mom, that's just a placeholder. Don't worry, we'll fix it." But I knew placeholders have a way of becoming permanent, so I stopped asking. I folded the schedule they sent, filed it under events, and went about my days quietly. I watered the garden, cleaned the silver frame, reread Harold's notes. And though no one invited me to choose the flowers, taste the cake, or tie the ribbons, I still circled the date on my calendar. Because a mother doesn't stop showing up, even when the world decides her name no longer belongs on the guest list. When the wedding day came, I pressed the post-it flat one more time and slipped it into my purse, next to the handkerchief Harold once carried to every formal event. If they wouldn't make space for my love, I'd bring it in folded form. And as I locked the door behind me, I whispered, "We already have enough." The words tasted different in my mouth, no longer rejection, but resolve. The reception glimmered like a movie set, soft jazz floating over the clink of glassware, golden light bouncing off chandeliers shaped like crowns. Waiters in pressed vests wove through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. I arrived on time, but it felt as though the celebration had already moved on without me. At the entrance, a young hostess scanned the seating chart on her tablet. "Name, please?" "Zara Whitmore." Her brow furrowed. She scrolled, frowned, then brightened. "Ah, yes. Table 17. I followed her gesture and saw it. A small, round table tucked near the corridor leading to the restrooms. Close enough to smell disinfectant, far from the laughter that rippled through the center of the ballroom. Beside my place setting sat a folded program, a single bread roll, and a view of the door swinging open and shut. I smiled anyway. "Thank you." Across the room, Clara twirled under a canopy of fairy lights, her white gown catching every shimmer. Graham's hand rested easily on her waist. Guests toasted, glasses high, while Sylvia and Victor presided at the head table, their posture regal, their smiles curated. It was a tableau, perfect and complete. A waiter passed by and paused, eyeing my seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "Are you staff? I can bring you a tray if you need one." I lifted my chin. "No, I'm family." His eyes widened. "I'm so sorry." He hurried off, cheeks flushed, leaving behind the faint scent of citrus polish. I folded my napkin across my lap and watched the evening unfold like a play I'd read before. The first dance, the speeches, the laughter that filled the gaps where my name once belonged. Clara's voice carried across the room during a toast. "To our families," she said brightly, clinking her glass against Graham's. "To new beginnings." Her gaze skimmed the crowd, but never landed on me. New beginnings, I thought, built on quiet endings. A photographer circled, snapping candid smiles, pulling guests together for portraits. When he reached my table, he hesitated. "Would you like a photo, ma'am?" I considered it. A record, proof that I had been here. Then I shook my head. "No, thank you." Some absences speak louder than any picture. The band struck up a livelier tune. Laughter rose, plates clattered. I glanced down at my place card. Just Z. Whitmore, printed in the smallest font. The letters looked fragile, as if a single drop of wine could erase them. Across the ballroom, Sylvia leaned toward Clara, whispering something that drew a small, polite laugh. Victor nodded, expression fixed. Graham lifted his glass again. It all looked rehearsed, every gesture measured. I took a sip of water. The ice clinked softly, a small percussion beneath the music. For a moment, I thought of Harold. He'd never have fit in here. Too loud, too honest, too fond of second helpings. He would have laughed at the idea of a seating chart. "As long as there's food and a story, everyone's welcome," he used to say. I felt the ghost of his hand at my back, steadying me the way he had when Clara first learned to walk. I stayed until the plates cleared and the first guests began to slip outside for air. Then I rose, smoothing my dress, and walked toward the side exit. No one noticed. No one called my name. The night air met me like a sigh, cool, briny, honest. I stepped onto the dock, heels tapping against the planks. The marina stretched out before me, boats bobbing gently under string lights. Somewhere down the pier, I spotted the silhouette of a small child. It was Maya, the flower girl, her curls catching the light as she skipped toward me. In her hand, she held a tiny handkerchief embroidered with lilies. "You dropped this," she said, though I hadn't. I knelt to her height. "Thank you, sweetheart." She nodded solemnly, then smiled. "You looked pretty tonight." The words landed softer than any applause. "That's kind of you to say." She grinned, waved, and ran back inside, her shoes pattering like raindrops. I watched her go, clutching the handkerchief. The fabric was delicate, but the stitching firm, made to last. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse beside the post-it I'd saved. One kindness beside one cruelty, both reminders of what people choose to give. Behind me, laughter burst from the open doors, but it no longer reached me. I turned toward the path leading to the parking lot, passing the rows of yachts resting in their slips. The Asteria gleamed under the moonlight, hull white and proud, name painted in Harold's script. For a moment, I paused and touched the railing, the metal cool beneath my fingers. "It's time," I whispered, not to the boat, but to the memory of the man who built it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the contact labeled Marcus Kane. The screen reflected in the dark water as I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, voice crisp even at this hour. "Mrs. Whitmore?" "Yes, Marcus. It's time." A brief pause, then a simple, "Understood." I ended the call, exhaled, and glanced once more at the ballroom lights glittering in the distance. They flickered faintly, like candles about to gutter. The tide lapped gently against the dock, rhythmic and patient. I stood there until the sound replaced the music in my memory. Then I walked to my car, heels steady, heart quiet. Sometimes leaving is louder than staying. The sky was still dark when I reached home, that tender gray hour before dawn, when even the city seems to hold its breath. I slipped off my heels by the door and set my purse on the table, the small handkerchief folded neatly inside. Its white edges caught the light from the kitchen window, a quiet reminder that not all gestures come with noise. I made coffee, strong and simple, the way Harold liked it. Steam curled upward as I opened the folder Marcus had sent years ago, copies of the trust, the QOD, the marina lease. Each page felt weightier now, not with anger, but certainty. Everything Harold had built, every signature he'd left behind, had been pointing here. At exactly 5:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. Marcus Kane. Outside. I slipped on my coat and met him by the curb. His car idled under a flickering streetlight, headlights carving pale lines across the pavement. Marcus stepped out, briefcase in hand, crisp as always in a charcoal suit. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore." "Morning, Marcus. Thank you for coming so early." He nodded, glancing toward the horizon where the faintest blush of pink touched the clouds. "Best time for clarity, no distractions." We sat at my dining table, papers spread between us. Marcus adjusted his glasses, scanning each document with a precision that bordered on reverence. "Everything is in order." Harold was thorough. "The trust grants you full authority over the vessel, both legal and operational." "I want it executed now," I said. My voice was calm, almost detached. "No notice. No courtesy calls." Marcus nodded once. "We'll file electronically through the Coast Guard portal, followed by confirmation emails to all relevant parties." He opened his laptop, fingers tapping with measured rhythm. "Do you wish to notify the Laytons afterward?" I thought of the ballroom, the laughter, the name tag gleaming gold against my chest. They'll find out soon enough. He didn't press. Some truths don't need discussion. They just need witnesses. I watched the cursor blink on his screen, each form filling with details that had once lived only in Harold's steady handwriting. Owner of record, Zara Whitmore. Hull identification number, LX9. Vessel name, Asteria. Slip lease, B17. When he reached the signature line, he turned the laptop toward me. "Digital. Signature here, ma'am." I took the stylus, my hand steady as I wrote my name, the curve of the Z, the long line of the W. It looked the same as it had on our marriage certificate decades ago. Marcus reviewed the file, then clicked submit. A soft chime sounded. "Done?" A moment later, his phone vibrated. He read the notification, then smiled faintly. "Timestamp, 05:31 a.m. The certificate of documentation transfer has been recorded. Confirmation copies will be sent to your email, the escrow officer, and the marina dockmaster. I've BCC'd the wedding planner for posterity." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "By dawn," I murmured. "By dawn," Marcus echoed. Outside, the first gulls cried over the water, their calls sharp and free. Marcus began gathering the papers, sliding each back into its folder. I should mention, Sylvia's attorney might attempt a claim. Promissory gift, estoppel, something in that vein. I raised an eyebrow. "Can they?" He shook his head. "No standing. The trust is airtight. Harold anticipated every scenario. Clause 12. No verbal assurances or implied intentions shall supersede documented ownership." It's watertight. Harold always did prefer watertight, I said softly. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He built this like he built his ships, steady and unsinkable. When he finished, he slid a single envelope across the table. Your copy, Mrs. Whitmore. I rested my hand on it. The paper was warm from his briefcase, edges crisp. So much history, so many hours of labor, reduced to a few sheets and a seal. Yet it carried everything that mattered: faith, foresight, and a quiet defiance that no insult could erase. Thank you, Marcus. My pleasure, he said, rising. And if I may, most people shout when they want justice. You, Mrs. Whitmore, sign. I smiled faintly. Louder that way. After he left, I stood by the window, coffee growing cold on the table. Outside, the horizon broke open with light, streaks of rose and gold reflecting on the water. The world was waking, unaware that one small truth had just set itself right. I picked up my phone. The notification blinked. Executed QOD transfer, vessel Asteria, 05:31 a.m. The subject line gleamed like a verdict. I tapped the screen, reading the details again, letting the weight of each word settle. Ownership, 100% Zara Whitmore. In the quiet that followed, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Harold would never have wanted gloating, but steadiness. A returning to center. I walked to my bedroom and opened the cedar box where I kept the lace from my wedding gown, the compass Harold once carried, and the photo of Clara on his shoulders. Carefully, I slipped the confirmation email, printed and folded, beside them. Then I placed the compass on top, its needle quivering north. The city outside was stirring now, cars starting, doors opening, voices rising. But here, in this small apartment that had so often been dismissed as modest, something grander moved. I closed the box, locked it, and whispered, "Anchor set." When I looked back out the window, the sun had climbed higher, scattering gold across the marina. Somewhere beyond those docks, the Asteria gleamed under the new day, exactly where she belonged. The marina office smelled of salt and cedar polish, the kind Harold used to rub into the rails before each voyage. I hadn't stepped inside since he passed, but that morning, the place felt almost familiar, like returning to a chapter I'd once dog-eared, but never finished. Behind the counter sat a woman with chestnut curls tucked under reading glasses, tapping a pencil against a clipboard. She looked up when the bell above the door chimed, her expression softening into surprise. Zara Whitmore? For a moment, I struggled to place her. Then her smile reached her eyes, and the years folded back. Carol! She laughed, a warm, low sound that carried a trace of the harbor wind. I thought that was you, still walking like you've got somewhere to be. I returned the smile. And you, still catching everyone who wanders in. We hugged briefly, the kind of embrace old friends give when time has thinned but not broken the thread between them. I heard about Harold, she said quietly, drawing back. He was a good man, always said hello, even on the days he was running late. Still managed to make a schedule for every sunrise, I said, half smiling. She gestured to the counter. What brings you here today? Lease renewal? I nodded. Marcus already handled the paperwork. I just wanted to confirm everything settled. Carol rifled through a drawer and pulled out a thin folder, her fingers tracing the labels. Slip B-17, Vessel Asteria. She flipped it open, scanning the documents. Yes, I see the update. Executed transfer. Timestamp 5:31 a.m. She whistled softly. You don't waste daylight. I leaned against the counter. Not anymore. She set the folder aside, then hesitated, studying me. Can I show you something? It's odd, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. From another drawer, she retrieved a small envelope with embossed lettering. Pearl paper, expensive ink. My name, written in flowing cursive, had been crossed out with a single black line. "This came in with the wedding invitations last month," she explained. "Marina office got a batch by mistake. Yours was in it." I stared at the envelope. The line through my name was clean, deliberate, an erasure performed with grace. "Must have been a mix-up," I said quietly, though both of us knew it wasn't. Carol slipped off her glasses. "Zara, I've seen a lot of things around here. People selling boats they swore they'd never part with. Families arguing over mooring fees like it's life or death. But that?" She tapped the envelope. "That's cold." I took it from her hand. The paper felt heavy, almost damp, like it had absorbed every slight leading up to it. "I guess everyone edits their guest list." Carol tilted her head. "Still hurts, doesn't it?" I looked through the office window, past the fluttering flags and polished decks. "Yes, but pain's a kind of compass, too. Points you back to what matters." She nodded slowly. "Harold would have been proud you held your ground. He told me once that you could tie a bowline in the dark. Said it meant you didn't panic when the light went out." I smiled faintly. "He taught me that after a storm took the anchor loose. We nearly drifted into the pier." "Then you know how to steady yourself." Carol pushed the envelope toward me. "Take it. Proof that even when they cross you out, you still exist in ink." I slipped it into my bag beside the Post-it and the handkerchief, a growing archive of small truths. "Thank you." She leaned on the counter, thoughtful. "You know, my niece got married last year. Forgot to invite me entirely. Said the venue had limited space." "What did you do?" "Sent her a toaster anyway. Figured kindness travels farther than resentment." I laughed softly. "Maybe I'll send one too." "Send two," she said. "One for you." We shared a quiet moment, the kind built on mutual understanding, the recognition between two women who had outlasted the sting of being sidelined. "You're not alone, Zara," Carol added. "A lot of us know what it's like. You raise them, you teach them right from wrong, and then one day they walk into a world that tells them you don't fit the decor." Her words settled deep, somewhere between sorrow and solace. "Maybe that's why Harold built the yacht," I said softly. "A place that doesn't change with the wallpaper." Carol smiled. "Then keep it polished. Let it shine where they can see what they lost track of." I thanked her again and turned toward the door. The morning sun flooded the docks, scattering light across the rippling water. The Asteria glowed at the far end, proud and still, her name gleaming in Harold's familiar script. As I walked back, the envelope pressed against my side like a heartbeat. Each step felt steadier, anchored by something stronger than bitterness, witnessed, shared, and understood. When I reached the railing, I looked once more toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the tide carried stories of those who stayed unseen and still found their way home. The diner sat on the corner of Harbor and Fifth, a relic from another decade. Its neon sign flickered between letters, buzzing faintly like a tired heartbeat. I chose it because it was neutral ground, no chandeliers, no marble, no echo of anyone's expectations, just chipped booths, steaming coffee, and the clatter of plates. I was already seated when Clara walked in. She wore a beige coat, hair swept into a bun that looked too tight for comfort. Her heels clicked sharply on the tiled floor, each step an announcement. When she spotted me, something flickered across her face. Hesitation, maybe. But she smoothed it away before reaching the table. "Mom?" she greeted softly, setting her purse down. You look, well, well enough, I replied. Coffee? She nodded, sliding into the booth across from me. The waitress poured her a cup and left without asking if we'd order food. The silence between us filled the space instead. Clara stirred sugar into her coffee, though she never used to. Her ring caught the light, throwing a small glimmer across the table. I got your message, she said finally. You said you wanted to talk about the yacht. Yes, I answered, placing a manila envelope on the table between us. It's called Asteria. Your father named her after the stars. She's fully under my name now. Clara blinked, unsure whether to smile or frown. Under your name? The transfer went through at dawn. Her brows knit. Wait, what? I thought Dad left it as part of the family estate. Graham and I shook my head gently. Your father left it in a trust. I'm the trustee. He was clear about ownership. She leaned back, a low laugh escaping, brittle at the edges. So what? You're keeping it? Out of spite? No, I said. Out of principle. I slid the envelope closer. Inside is a lease agreement, 12 months. If you want access to the yacht, you'll need to sign and fulfill the terms. Her expression hardened. Terms? Yes. You'll volunteer 15 hours a week at the Safe Haven shelter. Arlene Delgado supervises shifts. Ruth manages scheduling. Clara stared at me like she hadn't heard right. A shelter? You're joking. I'm not. She gave a short, incredulous laugh. Mom, I'm married now. I have a job, obligations. You can't just... I can, I said evenly. And I have. If you want to steer the vessel your father built, you start by serving people he would have helped. Her hand trembled as she reached for her cup, then stilled halfway. This is humiliating. I held her gaze. So is being labeled no one at your own daughter's wedding. Her breath caught. I didn't know they'd do that. Didn't you? I asked softly. Or did you choose not to notice? Clara's eyes dropped to the table, following a crack in the laminate. I was overwhelmed, she murmured. Sylvia said she'd handle the seating chart. There was so much happening. There always is, I said. That's how people forget who raised them. The clink of a spoon from another booth punctuated the silence. Clara rubbed her temple. You really think working at some shelter proves anything? It's not proof, I replied. It's perspective. I thought of Harold teaching her to tie knots, his patient hands guiding hers. Your father believed character is built in small, thankless places. He wanted you to understand that dignity doesn't live in chandeliers. It lives in how you treat those with less. Her lips parted, then closed again. Sylvia says charity is good, but you shouldn't drown in other people's mistakes. I smiled faintly. Sylvia's never spent a night counting pennies. Clara's jaw tightened. You think I've turned into her? I think you've forgotten you're mine, I said quietly. She flinched as if the words were heavier than I intended. You always do this, she whispered. Make everything a lesson. Only when the test matters. Her eyes shimmered, not yet tears, but close. So if I don't sign this lease, what? You lock me out. The yacht isn't a trophy, I said. It's a trust, your father's legacy. You either honor it or you watch from the pier. Clara stared at the envelope, fingers hovering above it, but not touching. You know Graham's family will think you're being petty. I'm not interested in their thoughts. They'll say you're vindictive. They already said worse. Her lips pressed into a line. Why now? Why this? Because last night, I remembered who I am. I leaned forward slightly. And I want you to remember too. The waitress returned to refill our cups. Steam rose between us, blurring the space like fog over the water. Clara stared into hers, silent. After a long moment, she whispered, "I don't know how to do any of that. Shelters, volunteering. I've never—" "Then it's time you learn," I said. "Everyone needs a place to start." Her eyes met mine again, defensive, confused, but something softer flickered underneath, the faint echo of the girl who used to race Harold down the docks. "And if I sign?" she asked. "You'll earn more than access to a yacht," I said. "You'll earn yourself." She blinked quickly, then laughed. Short, shaky. "You always talk like the world's a classroom." "Because it is," I said. "But not everyone gets to rewrite their final exam." She looked away, gathering her purse, composure cracking in tiny fractures. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Do that. But remember, leases expire." Clara stood, hesitated, then leaned down. "You really won't make this easy, will you?" "Nothing worth steering ever is," I answered. She gave a small nod, eyes wet but steady, and walked out into the morning sun. The bell over the door chimed softly behind her. I exhaled, tracing the rim of my cup. Outside, the reflection of the rising light shimmered across the window, pale and new. I glanced at the empty seat across from me, the envelope still resting on the table, weightless, yet heavy enough to tip a heart. Then I folded my napkin, placed it over the papers, and whispered, "Your turn, Clara." The safe haven shelter sat at the edge of town, tucked between a laundromat and a faded mural of clasped hands. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just a 2-story brick building with chipped paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Everyone deserves a second chance." But as Clara stood on the cracked sidewalk, clutching the manila envelope from our diner meeting, she felt smaller than she had in years. She'd driven there in silence, the hum of the car competing with thoughts she didn't want to unpack. Sylvia's voice still echoed from the phone call earlier that morning, words like unnecessary and demeaning. Graham had been gentler, suggesting maybe she should just talk to Mom again, but Clara knew me well enough to realize once I'd anchored a course, it wasn't changing. So here she was, heels clicking on concrete, designer coat too stiff for the January wind, squinting at a door painted the color of patience. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent and soup. A narrow hallway opened into a communal room lined with folding tables. People moved in quiet rhythm, ladling food, wiping counters, stacking trays. There was no music, only the hum of the heater and the murmur of voices carrying stories no one was asking to hear. At the front desk stood a woman with cropped dark hair, her sleeves rolled up. "Can I help you?" Clara cleared her throat. "I'm here to volunteer. I think I'm supposed to see Ruth Delgado." "That's me." The woman smiled, firm but kind. "First day?" Clara nodded, holding out the lease like a hall pass. "My mother, she said—" Ruth took one look at the papers and grinned knowingly. "Ah, Zara Whitmore, we've been expecting you." The warmth in her tone caught Clara off guard. "You have?" "She called last week, said you'd be joining us. Don't worry, no one starts perfectly. We'll find where you fit." Before Clara could reply, another voice floated in from the kitchen. "Most leave. Maybe you'll stay." A woman emerged carrying a tray of clean bowls. She was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and an air of calm forged by storms. "Arlene, this is Clara," Ruth said. "Show her the ropes?" Arlene set the tray down and extended her hand. "Welcome to Safe Haven. Don't worry about the title or the shoes. Just bring a steady heart." Clara shook her hand, trying not to glance down at her suede heels already gathering dust. I'm not sure what to do. Arlene smiled. Good. Means you'll listen. She handed Clara a rag and pointed toward a row of tables. Start by wiping these down. Don't scrub too hard. Some of the varnish peels if you rush. Clara hesitated, then took the cloth. The first swipe left a faint streak of soap and her reflection warped in the grain. Around her, others moved with quiet purpose. A teenager stacking canned goods, an older man mopping the corner near the radiator, a woman folding blankets with the precision of ritual. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't curated. And no one seemed to care who she was. Halfway through the second table, a bowl slipped from a nearby counter and shattered. Clara jumped, instinctively glancing around for someone to fix it. Arlene was already there, crouching with a broom. You okay? Clara nodded. I just wasn't expecting that. Life's noisy when it's real, Arlene said, sweeping the shards into a dustpan. Don't worry, we've broken worse. When lunchtime came, Ruth guided Clara to the serving line. Ladle, not pour. Eye contact helps. Most folks here haven't been looked at kindly in a while. Clara picked up the ladle, hands trembling slightly. The first man in line, a thin figure in a worn coat, offered a nod. She filled his bowl carefully, meeting his eyes just long enough to see gratitude flicker there before he moved on. By the 10th bowl, her rhythm steadied. By the 20th, she'd stopped counting. Across the room, Arlene watched quietly, arms folded. When the line thinned, she approached. You did fine, she said. A little stiff, but fine. Clara exhaled, surprised by how warm her cheeks felt. I didn't expect it to be... She searched for the word. Human. Arlene's eyes softened. It sneaks up on you, doesn't it? She motioned toward a corner table where a child sat coloring, humming softly to herself. That one's been here 3 months. Her mom works nights. Every time someone new walks in, she asks if they're staying. So, are you? Clara blinked. I don't know yet. Most don't. But you'll find out. Later, as the volunteers cleaned up, Ruth handed Clara a paper badge with her name written in marker. It wasn't gold foil or scripted calligraphy, just Clara. Letters bold and simple. You can leave it here for next time, Ruth said. Clara traced the ink with her thumb, then slipped it into her coat pocket. Next time, she repeated softly, uncertain but not dismissive. As she stepped outside, the sky had shifted to a pale winter blue. The street smelled of rain and bread from the bakery next door. Across the lot, a gull perched on a lamppost, feathers ruffling in the wind. Clara looked down at her hands, clean, a little raw from the soap, and thought of the yacht waiting in the marina, the rope knots her father once guided her through. She realized then she'd never tied one alone. Pulling the collar of her coat higher, she walked toward her car, the faint echo of Arlene's words following like a promise. Most leave. Maybe you'll stay. The following week at the shelter, Clara arrived without heels. She wore sneakers, plain and sturdy, her coat sleeves pushed up as though ready to be tested. The room bustled with the rhythm of necessity, pots clanging, chairs scraping, conversations broken into fragments of need. She slipped on the apron Ruth handed her, tied it loosely, and set to work folding donated clothes. Somewhere between stacks of sweaters and piles of socks, her eyes fell on a coil of rope lying near the supply shelf. It was nothing glamorous, just thick marine cord someone had donated with camping gear. But the sight of it caught her, as if tugging a thread long buried. Her hands stilled. Memory rushed in. She was 6 again, standing barefoot on the dock while Harold crouched beside her, sunburned and smiling. He held a shorter rope then, smooth and new, its fibers warm from the sun. "Watch carefully," he had said, looping it around the post. "This is called a cleat hitch. You'll need it one day." His voice carried the patience of tides. Steady. Certain. Little Clara had giggled, fumbling with the rope as it slipped from her small hands. "It's too hard." Harold chuckled. "Knots are just stories, Clara. One part holds, the other follows. You just have to respect the order." He guided her fingers, steadying them. When she finally tied it, crooked but functional, he kissed her forehead. "Good. Someday you'll do it without me." The memory throbbed like an old scar. She blinked back to the shelter, the rope still waiting on the shelf. Her throat tightened. "Clara, could you grab that cord?" Arlene called from across the room, balancing a stack of folding chairs. "We use it to secure the pantry door during storms." Clara swallowed hard, picking up the rope. It felt heavier than she remembered, the fibers rougher, older. She carried it to the corner, her fingers twitching with half-forgotten motions. Arlene set down the chairs and watched her. "You know knots?" Clara hesitated. "My father tried to teach me once." "Then try again." She knelt by the pantry handle, looping the rope clumsily. It slipped, tangled, sagged. Frustration bubbled, but beneath it was something rawer. Shame, grief, a longing she hadn't named in years. Her hands shook. She tried again, this time pulling too tight, the knot cinching wrong. She cursed under her breath, blinking fast. Arlene crouched beside her. "Slow down. The rope won't judge you." Clara exhaled, closing her eyes. She could almost hear Harold's voice. "Start with the anchor, not the sail." She pictured his broad hands, the way he steadied hers, the smell of salt clinging to his jacket. Her fingers moved more carefully this time. Over, under, loop, pull. The rope crossed itself, tightened with intent. When she tugged, it held, imperfect but firm. Arlene tested it with a sharp pull. The knot didn't budge. Not bad. Clara's lips parted. A small laugh escaped, fragile and aching all at once. "He used to say I'd get it right someday." "And here you are," Arlene said softly. Clara stared at the knot until her vision blurred. She pressed her palm against it, as if touching her father's hand again. The shelter noises faded. All she could hear was the echo of Harold's laugh, the rhythm of waves, the creak of old wood under their feet. Tears pricked her eyes before she could stop. Them. She turned away quickly, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "Sorry," she muttered. "Don't be," Arlene said. "Knots hold more than rope. They hold memory." For the rest of the shift, Clara moved quieter, steadier. She helped a child zip a donated coat, ladled soup with practiced rhythm, stacked blankets with care. Yet every action was haunted by the feel of rope between her fingers, the ghost of Harold standing beside her. When her hours were done, she lingered in the doorway, looking back at the pantry. The knot still held, simple but unbroken. She thought of her mother, of the papers signed at dawn, of the conditions set in ink. For the first time, Clara wondered if the lease wasn't about the yacht at all. Maybe it was about learning to tie something she'd left undone too long. Outside, the air smelled of impending rain. She pulled her coat tighter, walking toward her car with hands still tingling. In the pocket, she felt the paper badge Ruth had given her last week. Just her name, written in marker. Clara. No titles, no embellishments. She ran her thumb over the letters, then looked up at the slate sky. The clouds were heavy, but the knot in her chest had loosened, just enough to let breath pass through. The storm came sooner than anyone expected. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in from the east, dark and heavy, swallowing the sky in restless gray. The marina flags snapped like nervous birds, and the air turned electric, the kind of charged silence that makes you look up, sensing something bigger on its way. At the shelter, Ruth was already stacking sandbags near the back door. "Forecast says gusts over 50 knots," she called. "Harbor towns flooding first." Arlene handed out flashlights and blankets. "We've got families near the docks with no transport," she said. "We'll need volunteers to deliver supplies by boat before the tide climbs." "I'll go," Clara said before she could think. Ruth looked up, surprised. "You sure? The swells can be rough." Clara nodded. "I'll manage." A beat later, another voice joined in, steady, familiar. "She won't be alone." I stepped into the doorway, rain already dappling my coat. For a second, Clara froze, startled by my presence. I hadn't told her I'd be there, but some instincts run deeper than words. Ruth's eyes flicked between us, recognizing something unspoken. "Good. 2's better than 1. She pointed toward the dock. "The rowboats are tied near slip 6. Supplies are loaded. Jackets, life vests, dry food." We moved fast. Outside, wind whipped against our faces, sharp as salt. The rain began in needles, pricking skin, turning streets into mirrors. Down by the marina, the water churned, waves slapping hard against hulls. The Asteria loomed in the distance, her deck slick with rain, lights blinking faintly through mist. Clara hesitated at the edge of the pier, eyes wide at the surge. "It's worse than I thought." I touched her arm. "You've weathered worse than water." We climbed into the small rowboat, its paint peeling but oars sturdy. Clara slipped into a life vest, fumbling with the straps. Her fingers shook. "Here," I said, reaching over. Over, under, pull. She followed my lead, breath steadying as the buckle clicked into place. We pushed off, the boat rocking gently before finding rhythm. Each stroke cut through the dark water, raindrops forming tiny explosions across the surface. Lightning flashed far out at sea, illuminating the silhouette of gulls struggling against the wind. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the creak of wood and the whoosh of oars breaking waves. I stole a glance at Clara, jaw set, hair plastered to her forehead, determination etched into every motion. She looked older, softer somehow. Halfway to the far pier, the rain turned sideways, stinging our faces. Clara coughed, pushing damp hair from her eyes. "How much farther?" "2 slips down," I said. "We'll deliver the bags and head back before it worsens." She nodded, muscles straining, each pull heavier than the last. The wind tugged at the oars, threatening to twist them free. "I don't know if I can—" "Yes, you can," I said firmly. "Remember the knots. You start with the anchor." Her breath hitched, eyes flicking toward mine. "Dad used to say that." "I know," I said. "He'd be proud of you." Clara blinked against the rain. "I wish I'd listened sooner." "You're listening now." When we reached the slip, 2 figures waved from a flooded walkway. Ruth's volunteers, their ponchos snapping like sails. We passed them boxes, canned food, blankets, medical kits, hands moving fast in rhythm. The tide gnawed at the dock, splashing our boots, but no one complained. As we turned to leave, a gust caught the bow, spinning the boat sideways. Clara gasped, gripping the edge. I steadied the oar, pushing hard against the current. "Keep your weight centered," I called. She obeyed, heart pounding loud enough to hear. Slowly, the boat corrected, rocking back into balance. She exhaled, shaky but alive. You didn't panic, I said. I wanted to, she admitted, but I kept hearing your voice. We rode in silence for a while, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. The clouds began to lift at the edges, streaks of silver lining the dark. Through the mist, the Asteria shimmered, immense, graceful, steadfast. Clara's eyes lingered on the vessel. I used to think she was just a boat, she said quietly. A symbol, something to show off. She's a promise, I replied, built by hands that believed in steadiness. Clara nodded slowly, gaze soft. I didn't earn her. Not yet, I said, but you're starting to. The wind softened as we approached the dock. Volunteers waved from the shore, flashlights cutting thin beams through the gray. Our oars dipped one final time, slicing water that had begun to calm. When the boat bumped against the pier, Clara stood and reached for the rope. Her fingers, raw but sure, looped it around the post. Over, under, pull. This time, the knot held on the first try. I watched her, pride blooming quiet and deep. Good, I said. She turned, eyes shining with rain and something more. I called you Mom in front of them, she whispered. I didn't even realize I said it. I smiled, steadying the boat with one hand. Then you're finding your way back. She nodded, tears mingling with rain. I'm sorry. I know, I said. Let's start from here. We climbed out together, feet splashing onto the slick dock. Behind us, the harbor exhaled. Waves gentler now. Sky cracked open to reveal a faint, forgiving light. For a moment, we stood side by side, watching the tide recede. The storm hadn't spared us, but it had left something cleaner in its wake. And as gulls circled overhead, calling out into the calm, Clara slipped her arm through mine, not as an apology, but as a beginning. The rain had passed by morning, leaving the marina washed clean, its planks shining like varnished oak under a pale sun. Gulls swooped low over the water, their cries sharp against the hush that follows a storm. I sat on a bench near slip B-17, thermos of coffee warming my hands, the air still tinged with salt and cedar. For the first time in a long while, the world felt quiet. Not the silence of being unseen, but the peace that comes after choosing your place in it. I heard footsteps before I saw him, measured, deliberate, leather soles clicking in a rhythm too refined for these docks. Elias Rowe, Graham's younger brother, approached with a careful smile that never reached his eyes. He wore a navy coat, collar turned up, gold cufflinks glinting in the light. Mrs. Whitmore, he greeted, voice smooth as glass. You're looking well. Elias, I replied evenly. I didn't expect a visit. He spread his hands, all charm and contrition. Well, storms have a way of stirring old things loose. Thought it was time we talked. I gestured to the bench beside me. By all means. He sat, adjusting his coat as though the air itself might wrinkle it. I'll be brief. I understand you've taken formal ownership of the Asteria. I sipped my coffee. Formal, legal, rightful. Take your pick. He chuckled softly, though the sound lacked humor. Of course. Still, you can imagine how surprising that was for the family. They assumed the yacht would be part of Clara and Graham's marital assets. I can imagine, I said. But imagination isn't law. A flicker passed through his eyes. Annoyance, quickly smothered. You've always had a sharp tongue. Harold admired that, even when it cost him friends. Is that what you came to tell me? He exhaled, leaning forward, elbows on knees. No. I came to ask if there's room for negotiation. My firm's been expanding into maritime ventures. The Asteria would make a strong flagship, Leighton Row charters. Of course, you'd retain a share, 50-50 say, a partnership. I studied him. The Polish, the perfect posture, the confidence of a man used to doors opening. You mean you want me to lend her name to your profit? He smiled thinly. Why let sentiment anchor such potential? I turned my gaze toward the yacht. She floated steady, her hull gleaming, ropes taut. That vessel was built by hands that valued more than margins. Harold saw her as a promise, not a billboard. Elias followed my eyes, expression tightening. Funny, he didn't seem so moral when he turned me down. I looked back at him. Turned you down? He nodded, jaw set. 15 years ago, I'd just finished business school, eager to launch a freight line. I asked Harold for an investment. Small, by his standards. He said no, told me I lacked ballast, that I was chasing waves, not reading tides. His voice hardened. I never forgot that. And now? I asked quietly. He met my gaze. Now I'm the one reading contracts while his legacy sits tied to a dock. I suppose I'm just asking for another chance to prove him wrong. I let the words settle. The gulls cried overhead, the faint clang of a halyard tapping against a mast. He said no for a reason, I said finally, and I won't undo his lesson. Elias scoffed. So this is about pride? No, I said. About purpose. He believed in building what lasts. Not everything that floats should sail. He studied me, weighing persuasion against dignity. You'd really rather let it sit than let it grow. It's already grown, I said, into something steady. Clara's learning that now. A shadow crossed his face. Clara, she's volunteering, isn't she? Word travels. She's finding her bearings. He gave a short laugh. You always did run things like a captain. I smiled faintly. And you always mistook steering for control. Elias straightened, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. Then I won't waste your time. But don't be surprised when the Leightons call their lawyer. They'll argue promissory intent, implied gift. I've read the trust, I interrupted. Clause 12. No verbal assurances supersede documented ownership. Harold anticipated every tide. He froze, eyes narrowing. You've done your homework. It was my home, I said softly. I learned every board of it. For a moment, the facade slipped. He looked out at the water, jaw tight, voice low. He made it sound so simple. Work hard, stay honest, tie your knots right. But not everyone starts with a clean deck. I regarded him, seeing beneath the polish a flicker of something almost human. Regret, maybe, or the ache of always being measured and found wanting. Then start now, I said. You don't need the Asteria for that. He stood, slipping his hands into his pockets. You're not like the rest of them, Mrs. Whitmore. I know, I said. That's why Harold married me. For the first time, his smile reached his eyes, brief, rueful. Tell Clara I said congratulations on finding a wind worth following. I nodded. And you, Elias, find a harbor worth staying in. He hesitated, then walked away, footsteps fading against the dock. I watched him go, the shape of him growing smaller until the sunlight claimed the rest. When he disappeared around the corner, I turned back to the Asteria. The ropes held firm, steady against the tide. Harold's voice echoed faintly in memory. Some lessons don't need repeating, just remembering. I finished my coffee, the warmth lingering as I rose. The storm had passed, but its cleansing remained. The knock came just after sunset. I'd been setting out 2 plates on the kitchen table, though I hadn't invited anyone. Old habits, hope, muscle memory, maybe both. The scent of chamomile drifted through the apartment, soft and steady. When I opened the door, Clara stood there, coat damp from mist, eyes rimmed with something that looked like sleeplessness more than tears. "Come in," I said quietly. She hesitated, as though crossing the threshold required permission. Then she stepped inside, gaze sweeping over the bookshelves, the framed photos, the small vase of lilies by the window. "It smells like home," she murmured. "It is," I said, still. She removed her coat and folded it carefully, an old childhood reflex, tidiness learned from years of my reminders. Her movements were slower now, less hurried, like she was trying to handle invisible weight. "I signed the lease," she said finally. Her voice was low but steady. 15 hours a week. Ruth has me on evening shifts." I nodded. "Good." "It's harder than I thought," she continued, pulling out a chair. "At first I hated it. The noise, the mess, the way people looked right through me. But then Arlene, she told me everyone's carrying something heavier than a tray. I think she meant me, too." "She usually does," I said, taking a seat across from her. Clara glanced at the teapot, then at me. "You made chamomile." "Your father's favorite," I said. "He used to drink it after long sails. Said it kept his hands from remembering the ropes too tightly." Clara smiled faintly, then faltered. "Mom, I've been thinking about him a lot lately." "So have I." She stared at her hands, fingers laced tight. "I keep wondering what he'd say about all this, about me. He'd say you're still learning, and that's all right." Her breath hitched, but she pressed on. "I thought I was doing everything right, marrying well, building a future. Sylvia said image is everything. How people see you matters. I thought she was helping me be strong." "She was. Teaching you to be small," I said gently. "To shrink into someone else's idea of worth." Clara's eyes lifted, wet but defiant. "Then why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you tell me I was losing myself?" "I did," I said softly. "In every silence I gave you, in every door I didn't close. But you weren't ready to hear it." She leaned back, swallowing hard. "I saw your name tag that night. I pretended not to. I thought ignoring it would make it less cruel." I met her gaze. "Pretending not to see pain doesn't soften it, Clara. It just teaches it to last." Tears spilled, quick and unguarded. I was ashamed. Of you, of me, of everything. I thought if I built something prettier, people wouldn't notice the cracks. "And did it work?" She shook her head, eyes glassy. "No. All it did was make me forget who patched them first." The kettle hissed softly, filling the silence. I poured tea into 2 cups, the steam rising between us like fog lifting after a storm. "I'm not mad at you," I said finally. She looked up, startled. "You're not?" "No, I'm mad for me," I said. "For the years I let myself disappear. For every time I swallowed words I should have spoken. I gave you everything, Clara, even the quiet that hurt us both." She blinked, the words sinking deep. "Love without respect is just entitlement," I added. She winced, the truth sharp but needed. "I know," she whispered. "I felt it at the shelter, serving people who looked at me like I was new, not superior. I thought it would humiliate me. It didn't. It humbled me." "That's the beginning," I said. "Not punishment, awakening." She nodded slowly, hands trembling around her cup. "I saw a woman there yesterday. She reminded me of you. She thanked me just for handing her a blanket. It was nothing, but the way she said it, it felt like grace." I smiled faintly. "Grace usually hides in small gestures." Clara's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mom, for the name tag, for the post-it, for forgetting the sound of your voice when you weren't fixing things. I reached across the table, covering her hands with mine. I'm not a ghost, Clara. You don't have to apologize to bring me back. She squeezed my fingers, her tears falling freely now. I don't know how to make it right. You already started, I said. The rest is just choosing differently, one act at a time. She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. Then quietly, I told Graham I needed space. He didn't understand. He will, I said, or he won't. Either way, you're not lost property. Her lips trembled, then steadied. Can I ask something? Of course. Do you still want me to have the yacht? I studied her for a long moment, the softened pride, the weary honesty. When you're ready, I said, not because it's wealth, but because it's work. The helm waits for hands that know where home is. Clara let out a shaky breath, a small laugh woven through it. I'm not there yet. Neither was I once, I said, but the tide always brings us back if we stop fighting it. We sat quietly after that, sipping tea, the storm outside long gone, replaced by the hum of crickets through the cracked window. Clara glanced around the room. The photos, the chipped teacup, the framed note Harold once left me that read, "Tide's turning, be home soon." She smiled through tears. You never changed anything. Some things don't need improving, I said. When she rose to leave, she hugged me first, tightly, without prompting. Her voice was soft against my shoulder. Thank you for being angry for you. I think I needed to see that. I held her a moment longer, then let go. Go on, Clara. The world's still waiting for you to tie your own knots. She nodded, stepping into the hall. For once, she didn't rush. When the door closed, I stared at her empty cup across the table. Steam still rose from it, curling upward, tracing the shape of forgiveness in the air. Clara kept her promise. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday evening, she arrived at Safe Haven, coat sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, sneakers damp from the walk across the cracked parking lot. No entourage, no makeup, no camera-ready smiles. Just quiet steps, sleeves dusted with flour or soap by the end of each shift, and a steady rhythm of learning how to stay. The shelter had a way of sanding people down to their truest selves. There was no stage here, no chandelier light to hide beneath. Only tasks, simple, humbling, endless. Folding linens, wiping tables, listening without interrupting. Clara found herself moving through each night like a student relearning a language she once forgot. How to greet, how to thank, how to see. Arlene watched her from across the hall one evening, a small smile tugging at her lips. You've stopped checking the clock, she noted. Clara looked up from stacking cans. I used to count every minute. Now I just forget. That's how you know the work's starting to work on you, Arlene said. She handed Clara a tray of tea mugs. Bring these to table 3. The lady in the blue sweater. Her name's Lorna. She likes her tea with sugar, not pity. Clara carried the tray carefully, remembering the lesson from her first day. Eye contact helps. She set the mug down gently. Here you go, Ms. Lorna. Sweet, the way you like it. The woman smiled, her eyes bright behind thick glasses. Thank you, dear. You've got a kind touch. Clara blinked, warmth rising in her chest. It wasn't a grand compliment, but it was real, and that made all the difference. By the end of the month, Clara no longer flinched when someone brushed past her with an urgent task. She learned to kneel when speaking to children, to wait before offering help, to let silence stretch instead of filling it with empty comfort. Sometimes Arlene would catch her pausing mid-shift, staring at the pantry knot she'd tied weeks ago, still holding firm despite the daily push and pull. One quiet afternoon, Ruth called her into the office. "I'm adding you to the regular roster," she said. "Not because of your hours, but your heart." Clara blinked. "But my lease—" Ruth waved a hand. "Paperwork doesn't teach compassion. Presence does. Whether or not that yacht ever sails under your hands again, this place will always have a slip open for you." Clara's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. That night, as she hung her apron on the peg, she noticed a stack of blank name tags by the door. Arlene was there, sorting donations. "New batch came in," Arlene said, glancing up. "We like to have extras. Folks come through here lost, sometimes without a name. Writing it down helps." Clara ran her fingers over the blank tags, smooth, weightless. "Pick one," Arlene said gently. "You've earned it." Clara took a tag and a marker, the ink smelling faintly of renewal. She hesitated for a long moment before writing, careful and slow, each letter deliberate. "Daughter." She peeled it from the backing and pressed it to her apron, the adhesive warm against the fabric. Arlene smiled. "Looks good on you." Clara exhaled, eyes bright. "Feels right." On her walk home, the streets glistened with the remnants of rain. Storefront lights flickered across puddles, scattering little constellations underfoot. She passed the marina, the scent of brine and fuel lingering in the air, and paused at the railing. The Asteria rested in her slip, still and proud, her white hull reflecting the moon. Clara stood there a long time, fingers curled around the iron rail, remembering her father's hands guiding hers through each knot, her mother's steady eyes across the diner table, the quiet strength that had once felt like distance, but now looked like devotion. The yacht wasn't hers yet. Maybe it never would be. But she no longer measured worth in deeds or documents. Tonight, she measured it in calloused palms, in the sound of laughter rising from the shelter windows, in a name tag inked with the truth she'd almost forgotten. She took out her phone, typed a brief message, and hit send. "Finished my shift. Still learning. Thank you for everything." Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned toward home, her steps light, her coat smelling faintly of detergent and tea. In the distance, the tide whispered against the dock, like applause, meant only for those who had stayed to hear it. Winter settled over the harbor like a hush. Frost rimmed the rooftops, and the marina lights shimmered on the water like scattered lanterns. The air carried that clean, briny stillness that follows long change, the kind you can taste when something inside you has quietly turned. That evening, Safe Haven hosted its annual winter gathering. It wasn't grand. No gilded invitations, no hired quartet. Just folding tables draped with plaid cloth, a potluck of soups and casseroles, and a paper banner strung across the wall. Together, we stay warm. I arrived early, carrying a basket of gingerbread Harold's mother once baked every December. The scent, spice and molasses, filled the room as I set it down among trays of food prepared by volunteers and guests alike. The shelter buzzed with small talk and laughter, the kind built from shared work rather than obligation. Ruth greeted me with her usual brisk warmth. "Zara, perfect timing. Clara's helping set up chairs. She's been directing everyone like a foreman." I smiled, following her gaze. There she was, my daughter, hair tucked behind her ears, cheeks pink from the cold, sleeves rolled up. No heels tonight, no careful mask. Just Clara, steady and unguarded, adjusting place settings beside Arlene. She looked up as I approached. "Mom," she said, her smile blooming slow and sure. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, pulling her into a brief embrace. "Need another pair of hands?" "Always," she replied, passing me a stack of cups. For a while, we worked side by side. No fanfare, no ceremony, just shared rhythm. People filed in from the cold, families with children, volunteers, neighbors from nearby shops. Even Carol arrived, scarf wrapped high, clutching a tray of peppermint fudge. "Brought the sweet stuff," she announced, grinning. "Perfect timing," I said. "You remember Clara?" Carol gave a knowing nod. "Good to see you, dear. Your mom and I used to run this marina before the world got fancy." Clara smiled shyly. "She told me. I think you kept more than boats afloat." Carol chuckled. "A few spirits too, I hope." By the time the tables filled, the room glowed warm with conversation. Ruth raised her glass of cider for a toast. To another year of finding light in dark places, and to every hand that kept the door open. Applause rippled through the crowd, gentle but full. Clara glanced at me, eyes bright. "You should sit," she whispered, motioning toward the head table. "I'm fine here," I began, but she shook her head firmly. "No, Mom, up front." I followed her gesture and froze. On the table nearest the banner, a card waited with careful handwriting. Reserved, Zara Whitmore. Beside it sat another card, one I hadn't seen in years, a small white rectangle, slightly creased, the edges curling. My old name tag from the wedding, No One, laid flat beside a new one written in marker, Mother. The sight stole my breath. Clara touched my hand. "I found it in your album," she said quietly. I thought, maybe tonight was the right time to rewrite it. I looked up at her, the warmth in my chest spilling toward my eyes. "You didn't have to." "I did," she whispered, "because I want them to know who you are, who I almost forgot." A hush settled as she gently lifted the old tag, placing it beside the new one like a relic laid to rest. Then, turning to the room, she cleared her throat. "Everyone," she began, voice steady but trembling at its edges. "This is my mother, Zara Whitmore. She taught me that silence can be strength, and kindness can be justice. I didn't see it for too long, but I see it now." The room stilled, the kind of stillness that listens. "She's the reason I'm here tonight," Clara continued, her voice thickening. "Not because she made me, but because she showed me what it means to show up, even when you're not invited. So if you're sitting here thinking you don't belong, believe me, you do." A murmur of agreement rippled through the tables, a chorus of clinking cups and nodding heads. Arlene raised her glass, eyes shining. "To mothers who stay the course," she said. Ruth followed. "To daughters who find their way back." Carol added, "And to names written in ink that doesn't fade." The shelter filled with gentle laughter, the kind that raps rather than bursts. Someone began humming an old folk tune, and soon others joined, soft voices weaving through the warmth. I sank into my chair, my hand resting lightly on the new tag. Mother. The letters were uneven, the marker faint at the edges, but they glowed truer than any gilded print. Clara slid into the seat beside me, pressing her shoulder against mine. "You always said storms teach us what's worth anchoring," she murmured. "I think I finally get it." I smiled, my eyes tracing the banner overhead. "Together, we stay warm." "You tied your knot well," I said softly. "Because you showed me how," she whispered back. For the rest of the evening, we ate, laughed, shared stories. Arlene recounted her first winter at Safe Haven. Ruth teased Carol about her fudge disappearing too fast. A child climbed onto Clara's lap, offering her a gingerbread cookie. Clara accepted it with a grin, crumbs dusting her sleeves, and for the first time in years, I saw her exactly as Harold once did, open, alive, unafraid of ordinary joy. As night settled, snow began to drift outside the frosted windows, flakes swirling like slow confetti. The harbor lights blinked through the glass, steady beacons against the dark. When the last song faded, Clara reached for my hand, her voice a whisper meant only for me. "Thank you for waiting, Mom." I squeezed back gently. I never left. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and together we watched the snow fall. Quiet, graceful, inevitable, covering every footprint that had ever led us apart. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, pale and gold, glinting off the rim of my teacup. Outside, frost still clung to the railing, catching the light like lace. The world felt hushed, as if the storm, the shelter, the gathering, all of it, had settled into a calm tide, steady and earned. I had been awake since dawn, sorting through papers Harold, once kept in an old leather folio, the one faintly scented of cedar and sea air. Over the years, I'd added my own pages, receipts, letters, small notes of lessons learned the long way. But today was for one last entry. Marcus Kane arrived right on time, briefcase in hand, coat collar turned neatly against the cold. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he greeted, voice crisp but kind. "You said this would be final revisions?" "Yes," I replied, sliding the trust documents toward him. "Just small amendments, the sort that tie loose ends." He nodded, unfolding the file with the precision of someone who knows the weight of each word. "Let's take a look." I watched the ink and parchment, the legal lines that had once felt so foreign. Funny how time turns contracts into confessions. Clause 7, I began. 10% of the estate to Safe Haven Shelter, unrestricted. Ruth Delgado and Arlene Delgado as co-beneficiaries for management oversight. Marcus's pen scratched lightly. "Understood. It'll provide long-term stability. A fine choice." Clause 8, I continued. A one-time gift of $250,000 to Arlene Delgado for her son's scholarship fund or whatever purpose she deems fit. She's carried enough loss. Let her carry something lighter. Marcus looked up, the faintest smile tugging his mouth. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," I said softly, "but enough to leave the tide calmer than I found it." "And Clara?" he asked. I unfolded a smaller sheet, handwritten in my own looping script. Clause 9. 20% share of the trust to Clara Whitmore, conditional upon completion of 12 consecutive months of volunteer service at Safe Haven, or any registered charitable organization that serves the unhoused. Marcus adjusted his glasses, reading each line twice. Firm but fair. "She's finding her bearings," I said. "This isn't punishment, it's practice." He nodded. "Your husband would approve. He always favored lessons that lasted." I smiled faintly. He taught with rope and silence. I teach with paper and patience. "Anything else to include?" Marcus asked. I reached for a final page, a single paragraph written by hand, not typed. "Yes, a personal codicil." He read quietly, eyes tracing the ink. "This yacht sails only with kindness at its helm. May those who steer her remember that strength without grace runs aground. Let her harbor be open to all who seek safe passage, and may her compass point always toward compassion." Marcus let out a slow breath. "Beautiful," I'll have it notarized exactly as is. No edits, I said. Words lose truth when polished too much. He signed the witness fields, his handwriting sharp and sure. Then he turned the document toward me. I lifted my pen, steady despite the tremor that sometimes came with mornings, and signed my name, Zara L. Whitmore. Each letter deliberate, final, free. The sound of pen against paper echoed faintly in the quiet room. It was done. Marcus gathered the papers back into the folio, closing the clasp with a soft click. You've built something enduring, Mrs. Whitmore. Not just wealth, legacy. Legacy isn't marble or masts, I said. It's how the next tide remembers you. He nodded, understanding. Would you like me to courier copies to Clara? Yes, but give her time to read them alone. Some truths need solitude. Of course. He rose, slipping on his coat. I'll file everything by end of day. Congratulations. This chapter's complete. As the door closed behind him, silence filled the room once more. But it wasn't empty. It hummed with quiet purpose. I turned to the window, watching gulls glide low over the marina. The Asteria shimmered in the distance, her hull catching morning light. Soon she'd carry others, maybe Clara, maybe someone else entirely. Either way, her helm was ready. On the table lay my pen beside the last page, ink still glistening faintly. I pressed my hand over the words, feeling the pulse of everything Harold and I had built, not in assets, but in anchor points, dignity, kindness, steadiness. The kettle whistled softly on the stove. I poured a cup, the steam curling upward, warm and fragrant. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but lighter, like a sail finely trimmed to the right wind. Before leaving the table, I added one more note, folded neatly into the folio's pocket. To Clara. Remember, you were never no one. You were simply becoming someone who could see. Outside, the tide was rising, slow, faithful, certain. The sun had slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a lavender afterglow that shimmered across the harbor. The Asteria rested quietly in her slip, lights twinkling along her deck like low constellations. The air carried the faint perfume of salt and wood polish, familiar, steady, forgiving. I set the table for two. Nothing grand. Linen napkins, a small vase with winter roses, Harold's old candle holder glowing with a single flame. Steam rose from the pot of chowder, mingling with the scent of rosemary bread cooling on the counter. The clink of cutlery against porcelain sounded louder than usual in the hush. A gentle knock came at the door. When I opened it, Clara stood there, hair loose, cheeks pink from the cold, a wrapped parcel in her hands. I hope I'm not late, she said. Right on time, I replied, stepping aside. She entered, unwinding her scarf, eyes wandering around the apartment as though reacquainting herself with each corner. It hasn't changed, she said softly. Neither have you, I teased. Clara smiled, setting the parcel on the counter. It's just a loaf from the bakery by the shelter. Arlene said I should bring something made with my own hands. Then it's perfect, I said. We moved easily now, like two musicians, finding an old duet, passing bowls, folding napkins, steady in silence that no longer pressed. When we finally sat down, the candlelight drew a soft halo around her face. For the first time, I saw not the sharp angles of ambition or apology, but calm, earned, humble, whole. She lifted her spoon, then paused. It smells like when Dad used to cook on storm days. I smiled. He'd fill the whole house with chowder and jazz, said the trick to weathering anything was to keep stirring. Clara laughed quietly. I've been learning that. At the shelter, the storms are different. But the stirring's the same. We ate for a while, letting conversation drift in and out like tidewater. She told me about Ruth's new plans for expanding Safe Haven, about a child named Lorna who was teaching her how to fold paper cranes, about Arlene finally taking a weekend off. Each story unfurled with gentle pride, her voice steady, unhurried. When the plates were nearly empty, she set her spoon down and looked at me. Marcus gave me the trust documents. I met her gaze, calm. And? I read every page, she said. Twice. I cried through most of it. That's allowed. Her eyes shimmered in the candlelight. You thought of everyone. Ruth, Arlene, the shelter, even me. You earned your place, I said simply. She shook her head. No, you gave me a path to it. I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. All I did was leave the map. You're the one who decided to follow it. She smiled faintly, tears catching her lashes. There was a line in your letter, she whispered, about how I was never no one, just becoming someone who could see. I've been repeating it in my head. It's true, I said. Sometimes blindness isn't about the eyes. It's about forgetting where to look. Clara exhaled, shaky but peaceful. I see now, Mom. I see you. The words hung between us, soft, weightless, final in the best way. I poured more tea, chamomile curling into the air. Outside, the marina lights flickered gently, casting reflections across the table like shifting ribbons of gold. You know, Clara said, breaking into a small laugh. Sylvia called me yesterday, said she didn't understand why I'd waste time in a soup kitchen. And what did you tell her? That I was learning how to tie knots that don't come undone. I chuckled. Harold would have liked that answer. She nodded, gaze drifting toward the window. Sometimes, when I'm folding blankets, I think I hear him. That low hum he had when he worked. It's comforting. He'd be proud of you, I said. Clara looked back at me. Are you? I squeezed her hand. More than you'll ever know. Silence settled again, not awkward, but full, woven with all the words we no longer needed to force. We finished our tea slowly, the candle burning lower, wax pooling at its base. When the last flame flickered, Clara rose, gathering the dishes. Let me wash, she said. You cooked. I smiled, letting her. Watching her move through the small kitchen, rolling up sleeves, humming softly, I saw Harold in the angle of her shoulders, in the ease of her steps. A lineage of steadiness carried forward, quiet and strong. When she finished, she joined me by the window. Outside, the Asteria gleamed under the dock lights, calm against the tide. She's beautiful, Clara murmured. She always was, I said. We just needed to see her without wanting to own her. Clara nodded. I'm not in a hurry to steer her. Maybe someday. For now, I'm still learning the ropes. I smiled. Then she's in good hands already. Clara leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. You know, I used to think silence meant distance. Now it just feels like peace. I wrapped an arm around her gently. Silence is what's left when understanding finally arrives. We stood there, watching the harbor breathe, lights flickering across the still water. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the tide turned quietly, as it always did. Faithful, unseen, inevitable. And in that quiet, I felt it fully. The weight of healing, the grace of return, the truth Harold had always known. That calm seas don't make strong sailors, but they remind them what home feels like when the storm finally passes. The kettle clicked off softly behind us, the last echo of the night. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. Sometimes, after all the storms, The truest ending is just dinner, warm, earned, and quiet.